This all-natural fruit punch contains high fructose corn syrup. This natural meat comes from animals given antibiotics. This yogurt, which is made with natural ingredients, includes some pretty processed additives. Regardless of where you stand on some of these issues, these foods almost certainly aren't what you'd think of as natural. So what the fork does this label actually say about a food? This is MinuteFood. We recently made a video about marketing claims that digs into what companies are and aren't allowed to say about their products. But as a keen-eyed and discerning viewer, you may have noticed a glaring omission: the claim that a product is natural. And that's because this one little word is interesting and important enough to deserve its very own video. The label natural and riffs on it like all natural or 100% natural or made with natural ingredients started appearing on products here in the US during the groovy back-to-the-earth movements of the 1970s. And they've been showing up in the grocery store more and more ever since. That's because they work. Research shows that as many as 73% of people seek out products with natural labels, including me, at least before I did the research for this video. Because in our hyper-industrialized world, it feels good to buy something natural. We're willing to pay for it, too. One study found that buyers are willing to spend an average of 20% more for products labeled natural. There's just one problem. Nobody knows what that actually means. Research shows that people have all sorts of different perceptions of what a natural food is. It doesn't contain any GMO. Its production didn't involve any synthetic chemicals or hormones or antibiotics or pesticides. It was produced humanely or sustainably, or even that it has fewer calories. But here in the US, we do have regulatory bodies that are at least supposed to ensure that foods are labeled in a way that's helpful and accurate. The USDA, which is in charge of meat, dairy, and processed egg products, and the FDA, which does basically everything else. It's not quite that simple. Like, closed-face sandwiches fall under the FDA's purview, but open-face sandwiches are regulated by the USDA. But that kind of bureaucratic absurdity is a video for another day. Anyway, back in the 1980s, the USDA recognized the confusion around the term natural, and they took action. They decided that for products under their purview, anything labeled natural has to be minimally processed, like the processing can't fundamentally alter the product, and that no colors, artificial ingredients, or chemical preservatives can be added. This doesn't mean that the animals didn't receive any antibiotics or hormones or GMO feed, like some people think it should. But at least it's a somewhat clear definition of what that natural label actually means. And it's a requirement, one that has to be proven before a product can be sold. But remember, it only applies to meat, dairy, and egg products. Everything else, about 80% of the food supply, is under control of the FDA. And the FDA does provide so-called guidelines. In order for a food to be labeled natural, nothing artificial or synthetic should be included in or added to it that wouldn't normally be expected to be there. Like the USDA's definition, this focuses on how food is processed, not how it's produced in the first place. So it doesn't exclude a lot of the things people might expect it to. And it does allow for some pretty heavily processed ingredients, like high fructose corn syrup. But the way bigger issue is that these guidelines are completely voluntary. Companies don't have to follow them. And since natural labels are such big moneymakers, there's actually an incentive not to comply. Over and over and over, consumers and advocacy groups have asked the FDA to actually regulate the term natural. And over and over and over, the FDA has refused. One reason they've cited is that nothing in a modern grocery store can actually be considered natural, because it's all been fertilized or sprayed or chilled or processed or altered in at least some way by us humans. I feel like there's an equally compelling opposing argument that because we humans are part of nature, everything we've created is natural. And weirdly, the FDA does feel like it's possible to define and regulate the phrase natural flavors. But they've completely and repeatedly noped out of regulating plain old natural. As a last resort, consumers have turned to the legal system to hash things out, suing companies for misleading advertising. Like recently, a class action lawsuit challenged the all-natural label on Kind bars, calling it misleading because of a bunch of not-so-natural seeming ingredients. And the court ruled in Kind's favor because the plaintiff's testimony, even taken collectively, does not establish an objective definition of how a reasonable consumer acting reasonably understands the term all-natural. Basically, because there's no clear consensus of what the term all-natural means, the company wasn't misleading anyone by using it. But during the lawsuit, Kind did drop their all-natural label, and it hasn't reappeared since. Lawsuits have also led some other companies to ditch claims that their product is all-natural or 100% natural. But obviously, this process puts the burden on us consumers to sniff out and pursue misleading claims, which, frankly, sucks. And I'd actually argue that there's another problem with this whole natural mess. Because even though a natural label tells you basically nothing about a product, it pretends to. It implies that it's better in some way than the alternative. This idea that if something is natural, it's inherently good or healthy, and the corollary, that if something isn't natural, it's inherently bad or even dangerous, is known as the appeal to nature fallacy, because it's patently wrong. Sure, lots of natural things are good, but nature also spawned anthrax, death cap mushrooms, cyanide, and tornadoes, all of which are undebatably harmful. And while we humans have definitely invented things that are dangerous, we've also created insulin and vaccines and eyeglasses and refrigeration, all of which are verifiably good for us, even life-saving. Using natural as a shorthand for good and uncritically avoiding things that aren't natural sets us up for a dangerous worldview. I am not saying natural food labels are going to lead to the downfall of modern society, but they do perpetuate a potentially problematic way of thinking. So if you encounter a natural label in the wild, completely ignore it. At best, it is meaningless. If there is a particular attribute that's important to you when it comes to food, there are other so-called clean food labels that are clearly defined and better regulated, like organic, non-GMO project verified, animal welfare approved, and now even healthy. We have put together a cheat sheet of some of the more informative seals and claims out there, which you can find over at our super amazingly fantastic Patreon page. And that's a label we can stand behind. And hey, if animal welfare specifically is important to you, definitely check out Tab for a Cause. The Minute channels have been supporting Tab for a Cause for years. It's a browser extension that raises money for charity every time you open a tab. And right now, they're supporting the Humane League, a nonprofit that advocates for corporate reform and grassroots action to end factory farming practices. Since 2007, the Humane League's work has helped bring the number of cage-free hens in the US from just 3% to over 45%. And their global coalitions have driven thousands of commitments to eliminate cages and improve animal welfare for billions of animals. You can support this work for free, literally by just opening browser tabs. Something you're probably already doing over and over and over every day anyway. Download the extension and help end animal suffering at the link on screen and in the description below. And as always, a huge thank you to our amazing patrons. Without your support, MinuteFood simply would not exist. Yeah, that's an egg joke.